Hello friends, my name is Deepak Meena and you are watching Island Plus Tech Zone. So in this video we will discuss about what is JSON. So JSON, also known as JavaScript Object Notation, is simply a data representation format very similar to XML or YAML. It's used widely across the internet for almost every single API that you will access, as well as for configured file and things such as games and text edition like VS Code and many other places throughout programming. It used because it's extremely lightweight to send back and forth due to the small file size. It is easy to read compared to something like XML since it's much cleaner and there not as many opening and closing text to worry about, and it also integrates very nicely with JavaScript. Since JSON is just a superset of JavaScript, which means anything you write in JSON is valid JavaScript. So it integrates nicely with JavaScript, which is used all throughout the web for front end or back end of levitations. Also, almost every single major language has some form of library or built-in functionality to parse JSON strings into objects or classes in that language, which makes working with JSON data extremely easy inside of a programming language. Throughout your programming career, you are going to use JSON all the time, whether it's creating an API, consuming an API, or creating config files for you to use or for other people to use for your application. Now that we understand what JSON is and why it's important, let's dive into some of the syntax involved to JSON by starting by talking about the type that JSON can represent us. We know if JSON is a data representation format, so we need to be able to represent a certain data types within it, and JSON natively support strings, numbers, and those numbers can be in any format, whether decimal numbers, whole numbers, negative numbers, even scientific notation numbers. It support booleans, which can be either true or false. It support null, which essentially stand for nothing, a rest, which can be a list of any of the types that we talk about, plus the next type, which is the final type of object. An object is the most complex but most used type within JSON, and it allows you to represent values that are key value pairs. So you give it a key and then a value, and that value can be anything of the other types we talk about. So string numbers, boolean array, no any, and array number, any of the those different type can be the value for a key. So let's dive into an example of how to JSON inside of a file. The first thing that you need to do is to create a file within the .json extension at the end of it. That's .json at the end of your file, and that will create a JSON file inside of this JSON file. What you do is you take one of the type that we talk about and you put that inside of the file. So far example, you could put a string, you could put a number, boolean, whatever type you want inside of that file, and that's valid JSON. But if all have is a single string or a single number, it's really not very useful to have a whole file or for that single input. So what most of the time when you are working with JSON, you will have either an array or an object as your top level of your file, and then inside of that array or object you will have other values. So